Hi, I'm Vrinda. Do you remember when election coverage took off, many news items came out which placed the woman at the center of the electoral stage. It seemed as if the woman voter was going to be at the forefront of each party's election campaign, and there was a sense that this election would see many more female candidates participating in the elections. But now that the election is here, have you seen how and what the same media is reporting on about these women candidates? Any reportage on what their struggles are, what are their challenges on the ground? We thought we'll talk about that for a bit. But for now, the real news about women in this election is coming from Karnataka, where Prajwal Revanna, grandson of a former PM and sitting MP from Hassan, has allegedly sexually harassed hundreds of women and made video recordings of the assault, all of which has now been leaked in the public. How many primetime debates did you see being hosted on this topic? Have you heard the Minister for Women and Child Development, Smriti Irani, break her silence on this issue? Have you heard the PM break his silence on this issue? No. Such a massive, horrendous and sickening case of sexual abuse has surfaced, but there is no media outreach. We hear of women as their share in the voting percentage and see them in voting lines in the photos that are released from the Election Commission. But do we really see their issues covered with the same interest? Media coverage of women participating in the electoral process is often fairly limited to their role as beneficiaries of schemes or as that other half of the voting population whose tilt in favor of one or another leader is discussed very seriously by political analysts. But you will also find that there appears to be a bias in the media when it comes to covering them as politicians. The screen time and print space given to female politicians, the seriousness with which their campaigns are followed is not comparable to the manner in which male politicians are tracked. Another trend that I noticed is that while a few famous female politicians will get some amount of coverage, the less popular faces will hardly get any. There is a near absence when it comes to them. We will see Priyanka Gandhi, but we won't see what Bima Bharti is doing on ground. We will see Mamta Banerjee, but we won't see politicians from Jharkhand like Mamta Bhuya or Joba Majhi getting any space in mainstream coverage. Do you get to know what concerns these politicians are raising that set them apart from their male counterparts? Are they responding to any specific concerns of the women of their constituencies? We cannot assess them or their performance solely on the basis that they are women. Issues of gender are not addressed simply by fielding women candidates. There has to be an active engagement with gender-related concerns. There has to be a feminization of politics, and only then can concerns of gender be raised and addressed effectively. Another trend to be noticed is that often when female politicians are elected, when they have won, you begin to hear of them in terms of their personal lives, their past lives, or in terms of their appearance, their fashion choices, their marital status, and so on. For instance, this was the case in 2019 when a record number of women MPs won on TMC tickets, but media coverage was obsessed with the fact that some of them had been actresses earlier. Over the last 5 years, we have seen demeaning and at times very petty and very stereotypical coverage of women politicians. I will come to this later. But during elections, no substantial discussion takes place on how many female candidates have been given tickets and which party has actually spent time and resources on developing meaningful campaigns for their female candidates. You see these female politicians compartmentalized into the familial roles of Beti, Didi, Behenji, Amma, Bhabhi, but the same does not happen as often or as strongly in the case of their male counterparts. For instance, look at this headline which says that in line with their father's political inheritance, 10 daughters are contesting elections in Odisha. The headline doesn't even bother to call them contenders in a political race and then goes on to profile them as daughters throughout the length of the article. There are plenty of sons in politics as well. This is how every political and social system runs in this country. But do we see similar headlines about them? Just a few months ago, the media was abuzz with news that something big was going to happen because a special session of the parliament had been called. There were all kinds of speculations that the Uniform Civil Code or the One Nation, One Election program was going to be introduced. But none of that happened. What happened though turned out to be a significant bill in itself. the Women's Reservation Bill, which got passed in the Parliament. However, we now know that the actual implementation of that act will not happen till probably the end of this decade. Have we seen any robust discussions on that act in this election coverage? Have we heard politicians talking about the fact that such an important act is going to sit and wait for its implementation for many more years? Have questions been asked of the BJP that while it continues to cash in on the act, out of the first 419 candidates fielded by the party, only 67 were women candidates? Do you know that only 8% of the total 2,823 candidates in the first two phases of the Lok Sabha polls were women? Only 8%. A party like the TMC has had a far better record when it comes to fielding women candidates. The Congress too in the 2022 UP elections clearly said that they would support far more women in the election than they had in the past and gave 148 tickets to women. Do you remember this getting extensive coverage in the UP elections? I doubt it. And while that did not work to the benefit of the Congress, it was nevertheless an intervention in beginning to understand how political parties think of representation of the people on the ground. There was a time when Jayalalitha, Rabri Devi, Mayawati, Sheila Dikshit, Uma Bharti and Vasundhara Raje were all chief ministers at the same time. Between themselves, they covered the BJP, the Congress, the AIADMK, BSP and the RJD. But today, Mamata Banerjee is the sole female CM of a state. So there has been a systematic erasure of women from positions of power, and this brings me to my present concern, which is to closely look at the current election cycle and see how the women are participating as candidates, how are they being projected by their parties and how they are being covered by the media. While she has so far not entered the political arena as a contender herself, Priyanka Gandhi is somebody who has been active in the political strategizing and campaigning of the Congress. Listen to some of her speeches in recent times. These are speeches which have gone viral not only for the way in which she is talking about her personal life, but also for the way she is responding to women voters. In her Bangalore rally, for example, when she spoke about her mother's mangalsootra, she not only made a personal remark, but also managed to make a very strong political statement. She directly reached out to women voters who had been presented with false facts by none other than the Prime Minister himself, and who had particularly targeted them through a marker of their identity as married Hindu women. In the same speech, she spoke at length about the struggles of women who are dealing with and facing the brunt of inflation, managing homes as savings dip, facing the prospect of their young children not having jobs, and so on. So you see someone who is not afraid to be vulnerable on a political stage and who also manages to talk to women voters far more convincingly and personally than even Rahul Gandhi or the Prime Minister himself. The women voters she addresses in Bengaluru are not merely beneficiaries of the schemes that the Congress has introduced in the state. In her speeches, these women are spoken to as real people with real problems and real needs. You don't get to hear which female leader is popular amongst men or women, but we have been told multiple times over the years that Modi is very popular amongst women voters. The reason we are told is that he has reached out to women voters through schemes like Jan Dhan and Ujjwala. It is therefore not surprising that in the PM's speeches, women voters are usually talked about as beneficiaries of schemes. At times he does talk about other issues, like about the safety of women in Rajasthan. But then he does not say anything about his alliance candidate Prajwal Revanna's horrific crimes in Karnataka. But it's quite interesting to see how someone like Mahua Moitra is campaigning in Bengal. She's somebody who has been incessantly trolled, vilified, attacked and demeaned in the media and by the BJP. She has, however, owned her personality, her personal life, her politics and her defiant attitude on her sleeve. Her saris, her goggles, her purses, her shoes have all been discussed at length. But she is somebody who has fought again and again to bring back the attention to what she had to say. Particularly in the last year or so, even when her own party at times did not take as strong a position as her, she remained vehemently vocal in Parliament on the Adani issue. She is contesting from Krishnanagar again, one of the farthest away border districts in Bengal. You have seen Mahua's personal life endlessly discussed, debated and dissected on primetime TV. An elected representative's personal choices were considered to be the stuff of debates, but what she had to say on the Adani issue was not really seen as newsworthy. Now that she has been on the ground constantly for weeks, you will hardly ever see her getting any coverage in mainstream media. You must have seen anchors losing it over her goggles and her handbags, but you won't see them discussing her election campaign. You won't see them compare someone like Hema Malini to Mahua, who has gone on record to say that she has no obligation to meet her constituents. Similarly, Mamta, the only female chief minister left in India, fights her way through the maleness of media coverage and Indian politics in characteristic ways. Leaders like Mamta and Mayawati seem to have evolved themselves to bring the least amount of attention to their personal lives. Mamta has always stuck to her white sari and her white chappal and jura. Nothing about Mamta's appearance has changed in the many decades of her public life. The Prime Minister's fashion sense is often reported about, appreciated and even applauded. But if you had a female politician indulge in fashion choices like him, you would have heard a very different narrative. When you see Mamta upon the stage, you see her commanding the entire length and breadth of the space, as she often doesn't confine herself to the podium. The male domination of politics also means that female spaces are at risk of getting taken over. But leaders like Mamta show how they work through these given conditions. At this communal harmony rally, for instance, she is flanked by religious leaders of all faiths, all men. But she is the one leading the rally. There is no doubt left about her centrality at the event. Politicians like Mamta constantly challenge the notions of how a woman should be in public life. In her personal posturing, you don't see Mamta bringing attention to the fact of her gender. This itself seems a response to the male gaze and maleness of media and politics. Compare this to somebody like Madhavi Lata of the BJP, who has fairly recently landed upon the political stage, notably through her role during the Triple Talaq campaign. Nothing that Madhavi Lata has said so far has been memorable in terms of her political stance, or as a female politician at that. Her ultra-Hindutva persona has been put up against a Muslim man precisely for the reason that she is a woman and is currently championing the performance of Hindutva. She is going viral for launching imaginary arrows at mosques, and cases have been filed against her for the same. Most news revolves around her over the fact that she is competing against Owaisi, but you don't see any substantial coverage of how she is interacting with members of her constituency, how she is raising the issues that affect their lives, and we don't know what is her take on the issues that concern the women in her area. Such a campaign and such media coverage helps no one, neither her nor her voters, nor the cause of women in politics. An election is so much more than the kind of coverage you are subjected to. Women have found a place in this election in the form of mangalsootra, which is unfortunate to say the least. Issues of security, financial inclusion, equal opportunity and access to public spaces or participation in politics, all of these have been sidelined. Women have been reduced to mangalsootra wearing, talaq fearing, handbag carrying, goggle wearing caricatures by some of the most senior politicians in the country. It's not just the women who suffer when such trashy political commentary and media coverage is reserved for them. It's all of us as viewers of news and voters who have to live with it. Till next time, this is Vox Vrinda.